So, hi, everyone. My name is Erin, and I am the Geeky Gimp. And today I'm having a live panel with some of my friends. And today we're going to talk about disability in Star Trek. So let's start by introducing ourselves. My name is Erin, and I'm 31 years old, and I've been a fan of Star Trek for 5 years now, and I've seen every series except the last 5 seasons of Voyager. So now Alice, you can introduce yourself.
Hey everyone, my name is Alice Wong, and I'm also a big-time Star Trek fan. I will be upfront and say Next Generation and Deep Space Nine are more of my particular favorites, and I'm happy to be here.
Nice. Okay. Andrew, you can say hello.
Yeah, I'm Andrew Polrang, and I've been a Star Trek fan since I can remember, but I really got into it in college. And I've seen basically all of the series except I'm also incomplete on Voyager. I have probably maybe half the episodes I've seen. And not entirely in order. But yeah, everything else I've seen pretty much all of it. And my favorite series is actually the original series.
Nice. Okay. And Day, you can introduce yourself. While she's trying to figure that out, we can Zach, you can introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Zach Klein. I'm 26, and I've been a Star Trek fan for well over, I'd say, 14, 15 years at least. I have read more scripts for the shows than I have actually seen, but my favorites would probably have to be Next Generation, and then original series and Deep Space Nine, probably in that order.
Actually, I forgot to say, my favorite series is the original series and Deep Space Nine are my favorites. Okay. Day Al-Mohammed is a popular culture fan, science fiction fan, and I just lost the chat up. Is a science fiction fan, author, and most recently a documentary filmmaker. Oh, that's awesome. Okay. So let's start the conversation. We can either start by talking about episodes or characters, but let's start with the original series. So what are your favorite original series episodes, and what are some of the interesting disability themes in the original series? Anyone can just jump in.
Well, I'm going to have to bow out of this part because really my knowledge of the original series is pretty sparse, so I'll let you guys jump in.
Okay.
Well, I feel like the biggest story on our topic is
the menagerie.
The menagerie part, and the cage. If you count the original pilot that is now on Netflix, that for years and years was never seen, but with the slightly different cast and everything, which later got made into this two-parter involving Captain Pike and the prior captain before Kirk. And Captain Pike, well, obviously spoilers, right? Okay, so
Yeah.
Captain Pike is found, the crew is called the space station where he is, and discovers that he is been horribly injured in a terrible accident. And on the show itself, you basically have a clay bust of a guy's head that doesn't move, and sits on top of a big sort of dome of a wheelchair that barely moves, and has a light on the front with a beeper that beeps 1 for yes, 2 for no, or something like that. And that's the extent of his expression, that's the extent of the technology in this far future for people who are essentially quadriplegic. I mean, that's the idea. He's so badly injured that there's nothing left of him but his head sort of sticking out of this wheelchair thing.
That's not even getting into, in my view, the most problematic aspect of it all, which is that he is essentially given the opportunity to experience his ideal quote-unquote life by this alien society.
Yeah.
Right.
Totally independent of his disability.
Right.
Yeah.
And, the deal is that when he was younger and active as a captain, he had visited this planet where these big-brained telepath aliens were trying to nab creatures for their zoo, basically. And they wanted humans to set up a little human colony that would fix things for them and be slaves. And they would give the humans the illusion of whatever they wanted. So it was like, the ultimate, whatever you desire, you will experience. But on the original show, the original crew that found this, they said, this is unacceptable. This is fraudulent, and it's the ultimate human rights violation. And we would all rather die than submit to this because it's fake and captivity. To the point where, after they left, Starfleet made the planet off limits to humans to even visit, and it's the only thing that you can have the death penalty for, just to go there, because it was so evil what these aliens were going to do to make you a slave, which, I'd say sort of right on to that. But when Captain Pike is horribly injured, now it's completely flipped around. Now it's awesome that we can take him to this place and he can experience happiness that he can't have because of his horrible disability. It's terrible. It's disgusting. And it's okay, even though it's the death penalty to go there. Oh, that's okay. We're cool with that because, after all, this poor fellow.
Pity on poor.
Whatever.
Yeah. It's troubling.
Yeah.
I mean, I've never personally. I don't know. I mean, I think that from a modern disabled perspective, it's very obviously troubling. I think it's also obvious that they had no. I mean, disability was being used as obviously fate worse than death kind of euphemism.
Right.
And that's really hard to hard to swallow. I mean, in a sense, I like the episode, but I like it in spite of that.
Yeah, I like aspects of it.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
like aspects of it, but yeah.
Yeah, and they just texted on the menagerie. She said, she typed on the menagerie, the idea of disability and what life is like with a disability, a single beep, because someone didn't think about it. How people live in the 20th century. So those are her.
Right, that's another aspect that everything is all very futuristic, and Stephen Hawking has better equipment than this guy today, you know, and lots of people who with those disabilities. But that happens a lot with the old Trek, actually.
Yeah, and I think it's not. I won't say it's excusable, but I will say it's not the first time that disability has been left out of the conversation for future visions of the future, if you will.
Right.
I think it's not unusual. I don't like it, but
No, there's right. It shouldn't be surprising. The only thing that I think is sort of extra, puts that extra layer, is the fact that the show makes the point very firmly that this life of illusion that the aliens offer is the worst thing ever, to the point where even going there is the death penalty for you. Except when you're disabled, and then it's fine.
now
That's really what the show says.
I think is it worth pointing out that I think that the disability angle is not in the Cage episode. It's in the frame story of the menagerie. I think that's correct.
Yes. Right. They took clips from the original pilot that involved the young Captain Pike visiting the planet and pasted it in to build this other. Yes.
Yeah.
Correct.
I think it's worth.
And I think that episode also shows that at that time, and even today, disability is seen as something that should be not in the public. It should be hidden away as something not worth being or not worth seeing. And to be disabled is worse than death in that episode. So what do you guys think about that aspect of it?
I disagree. No, I mean I don't disagree with what you
Vehemently
said.
disagree.
Right.
Yeah. No, he's basically shut up in this starbase. They don't indicate that he does anything at all. You know, his chair moves really, really painfully slowly, and that's it.
Right.
It's really sad.
Right. I mean, I just remember that scene where I think Captain Kirk and Spock go in to see him for the first time. You know, after his accident, they go in to see him, and I just remember their reaction is like very much a reaction that I have encountered in my own life, which I thought was interesting, but also very sad, because it shows you what they think of disability.
Yeah.
But again, it's like,
They being the crew of the Enterprise in this case, or they being the people who wrote the show.
Right, yeah. It's hard to differentiate sometimes, I think. And Alice, you're gonna say
I
something?
just wanted to, I don't mean to speak for Dave, but she texted, what's interesting is that in a world set in the future, the idea of disability is still alien.
Mm-hmm.
And in fact, is more alien than actual aliens. So, the alien within the humanity is really, I think, a doubly interesting kind of metaphor, right? That
Yeah.
it's to be feared and segregated, out of sight, out of mind. And, when thinking about the original series, which was created in the 1960s, 70s, I mean,
Yeah.
that's not like too surprising, right? I mean, they're lauded for a lot of progressive depictions of race and gender, but obviously, like space, disability is the last frontier, so they're still pretty behind when
Yeah.
it comes to the original series and being progressive, in my opinion.
Oh, I'm sure, and I don't think I doubt that it even occurred to them to think of it
Yeah.
the same way as race.
Hmm.
That wasn't what it was about. I mean, I think in later shows they do, or they try to, and there's some awareness that this is like that, but I don't think they thought that at all.
Okay.
It's
Also,
just not not a thing that was in the public consciousness at all,
exactly.
really, until the Disability Act, the
And
Congress started passing legislation and so forth. Yeah.
mhm.
I mean,
And then they had one other comment. They turned Pike into something quote unquote other. He isn't treated or filmed as a human. If you look at the camera angles and the way he's talked about, he doesn't have any real agency in his own fate. So an interesting question is why? Race is thought of, um, individual morality is thought of. So, I guess the question is the not disability. So,
Jay,
Well,
that's
I
a
think,
huge point. And
go ahead.
I was going to say, and what Jay just said about his lack of agency is made very explicit too. That part of the story is that Spock, who used to be Captain Pike's science officer, and has this deep loyalty to him, which is actually very touching in a way. But Spock has broken every rule to make all this happen, to bring him back to this planet because of knowing of his terrible injury. And so Spock is putting his career and life on the line to do this. But repeatedly, Spock tells him, I have to do this. And Pike, by blinking no, that's all he can do, is telling him, no, you can't do this. And, you can extrapolate and say, he's a Starfleet captain. He's saying, straighten up, mister. You're not allowed to do this. This is not right. No, no, no. You can't do this for me, whatever.
if you
But
want to read,
Spock won't do it. Spock doesn't care. He's not a captain anymore. He's this guy, and Spock has this thing he's got to do, and he doesn't care what the man himself has to say about it.
Right. So, what do we all think about Spock specifically in this episode? Does he? Well, how do you think about his relationship to Captain Pike? As far
very
as
paternalistic
disability,
is the word that
yeah,
comes to mind.
Which is even worse
We
since
know, I know
Spock is below him in rank. I mean,
that's true.
Pike is the mentor of
Right.
all things, But
Yeah.
suddenly you have disability. Oh, now it's all reversed. Now I'm the one who knows best for you.
Mhm.
And I could even call it somewhat out of character, perhaps.
Mm.
But that's another story. I
Okay.
don't know.
So, there's another episode that we should talk about, and that is the one, is there, in truth, no beauty? which is the episode where that lady has the dress that lets her see even though she is blind. So what do you all think about that episode and the way disability is represented?
Scarcely better from my perspective as a blind person. I mean, it's not quite as egregious as Captain Pike, as the Captain Pike story maybe, but it is not exactly positive.
Mm-hmm. I thought it was weird to me to look at this episode that seems to be pro disability and then compare that to the menagerie where disability is just considered something terrible. So, Andrew, what do you think about that episode?
I agree. I think it's a bit of an improvement. I always think of it as a very confusing episode. That figuring out what exactly they're trying to say is actually very hard, including about disability. You know, one minute she's really, admirable. She's got her act together. She is very adapted and functional and all that good stuff. But at the same time, she's also. Are we supposed to think she's?
She's kind of petty.
Petty, yes. And I don't even always understand what that's even about. I don't know. But yeah,
it's an incoherent kind of, yeah.
I think there's a lot of gender stuff going on too. Is the bottom line, and that gets all mixed in, and the disability stuff alone seems okay to me. There is a moment when, what is it? Something about somebody says something like, "Well, you can do many things, but you couldn't fly this ship," or something. Like, oh, you have to know that there are limits. When at that point they had not shown that there are any limits. We just take it or something.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yeah.
Yes. Yay.
Okay. Yeah, that would be the downside of having on the camera as well, and yeah, I wanted.
Oh.
So
Awesome.
So, yay! To keep up typing.
Okay. Awesome. Okay, so Day, do you have anything that you want to add in about this episode?
Still on the menagerie?
No, we're talking
No, we
about...
moved on to Is There a Truth? No.
I'm sorry, you cut out.
Is There in Truth No Beauty?
Which one is that one?
That's the one where she has a dress that lets her see because she's blind.
Man, I can't believe I don't remember that one. I do not remember that one.
Aliens that you can't look at because they drive you
The vests
crazy.
were used in one of the books as something that we use with children, and the technology is than other things. So, series, I don't remember that episode, but I do know that it was used much more extensively in one of the books.
Wow.
No, I didn't know that.
It's the one where there's the creature called the Medusa that is in a box, and if you look at it, you go insane, and that's why she can deal with it.
Awesome.
She doesn't see, but she connects psychically or whatever.
And the class ability because it's needed for that episode.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then we never see or hear of it again.
We see the actress.
Oh, but this is not unusual in the realm of Star
I
Trek.
see that. No, in the old series, nothing ever lasts.
Yeah,
Literally.
and I'll admit I am definitely a TNG kid, so that's that.
Okay.
So
Yeah.
At least
um,
we know where you
I
stand.
Alright, so we can talk about, um, um, since they brought up the next generation, how do you think disability is presented in that series compared to the original series? Alice?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's obviously far more in a more positive aspect where people with disabilities are members of the crew, they're colleagues, they're not really seen as all that different. It's part of the natural diversity among the workforce. I mean, among the members of the Star Trek. So it's like kind of like there's also cross species diversity, but also within the human species. I mean, the most obvious example is Geordi LaForge. But
Yeah.
I was just thinking just the other day, in preparation for this talk, that Reginald Bartley is also a really interesting character with a disability because he has phobias, he has anxiety, and he has addiction to holosuites. And throughout the series, we've seen several episodes where not only does he deal with his fear, and it really manifests within certain plot points, but also you see him in counseling sessions with Troy. He's actually, wanting to work on techniques and ways to really help himself become better. And I thought most people in the various blog posts about disability in Star Trek have also focused on physical sensory disability, but if you think about mental illness and invisible disabilities, Reginald Barkley is actually a really cool example of somebody who's open about his mental illness and how his colleagues have really, really accommodated and trying to work with him. So to me, I don't even think it was intentional on the writers or the creators of that show, but I thought it was just another wonderful facet of disability representation that wasn't like hitting you over the head with it. It was just like a natural part of providing another aspect to the show. And I think he actually provided a lot of like comedic relief throughout the show. Like there was that one episode where in his hollow suite he had like all his versions of the officers and he has a little fantasy. I mean, there's some really funny moments, but it's like there's some also serious things about his phobias and his anxiety. So I thought it was really good that it was sneaky in that way, that there's a lot of different representations of disability, some that are more overt and some that are less. So that's another reason why I like The Next Generation.
And I like the way they introduce him initially as basically a pain in the ass that everybody just about had it with. And, he's like a step away from like being discharged or, stop the ship for being such a pain because he's so difficult. But, with a little effort, they figure out that he's really worth sticking with. And he's figures out that it's worth trying to stick with the ship instead of just giving up. So yeah, and he ends up being a really important, like even in Voyager, I think he's got some sort of occasional role where he's like leading a team to get the Voyager.
I also like how Geordie LaForge as his direct supervisor was really, working hard to work with him. Like he was an example of a pretty good supervisor who is concerned about his performance and his well-being, but he didn't shunt him off or dismiss him or stigmatize him in any way. So I thought in terms of a workplace accommodation angle, I thought it was really nice in the sense that LaForge was really thoughtful in his way of how do I make sure this person who is working for me does his best and is going to be healthy. So I thought that was nice.
I always is set up as the specialist. If you think about it, we have the captain, we have his second, you have security, but if you think about it, the engineer is the specialist. And a small part is if you had to build a character with a disability and put them in, probably one of the best places because they're going to have a skill that's needed by others. It's not a bad thing. It's just where does that tend to fall is if you're the specialist, you're accepted. You also, I think, see that, I mean, that's reflected in our world as well.
As a blind person, I've got some feeling, I don't know, I'm kind of conflicted about Geordie LaForge. I like him as a character and so forth, but I feel like, how do I put this without sounding weird? They seem to show him, in a lot of cases, as being pretty much equal, and his disability is mitigated by his fancy headgear, as far as I understand it. But to an extent, I feel not a very nuanced representation because, at the moment anyway, I'm nowhere near being able to actually do that. And I'm not sure, even if I could be in that position, that I would really want to be. I feel like we lose a little diversity when we basically give everyone the magic gadget that lets us operate.
Right.
Am I making sense?
Yeah, I'm just going to read what they said.
Totally with you.
Yeah. In other words, they bypassed any real problems by just making the technology super good.
It's magic. It's magic.
So it hardly even matters.
Yeah.
And he's not a blind guy anymore.
No, he's not. And he doesn't.
Really?
Except that the visor is there.
And it does occasionally malfunction, I believe. But I mean, what? I think.
It wasn't there one scene where an alien visitor was on the Enterprise, and they look at Geordie, and then they made some comment on my planet, people like you would have never existed, and Geordie said something like, well, in our culture we embrace, the difference. But I thought it was, at least there was some of that recognition that, he is considered disabled by, let's say, other species. But his tech definitely negates a lot of his blind identity within the human sphere.
And there's one of the earlier shows, I think, involved the Q who offers him his sight or something. I think so. Well, I'm not sure, but I think that does happen. The Q's trying to bribe everybody, right, and give you your heart's desire, whatever. And so for like a moment, he has full, regular sight, not visor.
Yes.
And he kind of digs it for a little bit, and then says, "Yeah, that's enough of that. Screw you,"
Really, isn't it a moment and then he looks back at Q and he says, "I've seen all I need to see. I'm good," and then
Yeah, something like
Just
that.
a great moment.
That was neat, but that's
No.
enough.
I mean, I don't mean to sound like I'm ragging on Geordi unnecessarily. I mean, I do think he's a great character and he's a great step up. But sometimes I just feel like I've gotten some comparisons to him,
Oh, that's annoying.
I'm sure.
and it's
No, I mean,
yeah.
before our conversation, going through lists of stuff in it, I basically agree with you that as a blind character, Jordy's kind of half doing anything in regard to blindness. There's that visor's an awfully big out
Yeah.
for what it's worth.
And it's another, I think, indication. I mean, we can quibble about this or not, but we do see the introduction of devices and assistive technology that can really impact people with disabilities. And I can't help but
Absolutely.
think about the board. I mean, the board are in a lot of ways, people with people who are they made into these better beings, and
And
there's
that's portrayed as a negative.
yeah, and I feel like there's
That's
a lot
true.
of people with disabilities.
That's right.
Actually,
Okay.
it's Doctor Who, an attack of the Cybermen.
Uh-oh.
Think about not look like, but they seem to be like a direct correlation. If you,
I forget their shtick, but it's.
and I know I'm.
I mean, I've only barely scratched the surface of Who in any form, so.
Same here.
I wanted to, when we were talking about Jordy, and I was thinking, does disability exist at all? I mean, considering if we look at disability as a social oppression, if there's no, if there's like a utopian future, does disability even exist? If there's no oppression, or is
No.
it just
No.
no?
No, I don't think it does. I mean, I think it's maybe debatable at best, but from my perspective, if you get enough something to let you function as well as they function, I mean, it doesn't really seem to matter as much, or certain.
Yeah, and again, it builds this mirrored hierarchy, right? I mean, to me, I think I don't want to bring it back to the board, but I do think it's really interesting that they are kind of creating this new hierarchy of what is, I guess, real functional. What does it mean to be fully capable? And they look down on humans and all sorts of different species, and they're building a better creature. And this really reminds me of recent articles by the transhumanists, people who are really believing that with technology, prosthetics, and changes in genetics, that one day in real life we can eliminate disability. And this brings back to Aaron's question about, well, without oppression, would there still be disability? So I think these are an interesting parallels.
Well, yeah, it is an interesting question, but the Star Trek that I see it still includes social aspects, even if they're different. They haven't depicted yet that I can think of when they tackle disability or have disabled characters, they don't depict perfect, seamless integration. It's maybe close, but they still kind of deal with it in this, you know, like it's a topic.
Mhm.
And I'm thinking about guest characters and short-term stories in the next
I don't
show.
think we've seen any, really. I mean,
Well, there's the two that I'm thinking of. One involves a guy who is a diplomat who is deaf and has three
oh, yeah, that's right.
people
I think I know what you're talking
for
about.
him as his interpreters. And the other is a show that I rewatched this morning, and it's maybe the worst thing I've ever seen. Does anybody remember the Packlets?
No.
It's a humanoid species in the Next Generation universe, and they are a very heavy-handed analogy to Down syndrome. They are a entire species who look like a terrible caricature
Oh,
and talk like a caricature
yes.
of Down syndrome, and they are depicted as simple, quote unquote, and not very bright, and yet they cannibalize technology unscrupulously. People.
Yeah.
It's the worst. Oh my God! I nearly.
Sinister, simple people.
Yeah. I had remembered everything about it except the sinister part. When I watched it this morning, I said, "Oh my God, it's even worse than I remembered." Because it's not only that. Oh yes, people with cognitive impairments are kind of cute and kind of funny, kind of weird, but watch out because they'll steal things from you and kidnap you, and it's all because they don't even really know what they're doing. So it's even worse. Oh my God.
Yeah.
And I'm sure
That's a pretty terrible.
I'm sure that the people writing it thought they were dealing sensitively with cognitive impairment on purpose, and I bet they thought that their message was, oh, don't underestimate people. Because that was sort of the surface message, that everybody thought they were stupid and therefore let their guard down. But they turned out to be a lot more wily than we thought, which is sort of a message that's there. But the other stuff was so horrible.
So are we going to also bring up another horrible episode that's been blogged about and talked about a lot? Of course, that's the one with Worf becoming paralyzed.
Yeah.
I mean, it's been rehashed by people with disabilities a lot, but, again, this is one of those more overt examples of, I'd rather be dead than disabled. And I don't know if there's anything to add to that to talk about it, but I just think it was disappointing to see that, of course, especially with the
I actually wrote about that episode in my blog, and I actually have to disagree a little bit. I thought they handled it really well, because I think the episode itself was about how Worf's opinion of himself and him wanting to commit suicide was seen as a negative. Like, it wasn't assumed, that he should. The main point of the episode for me wasn't that disability is worse than death. To me, the point of the episode was you can be disabled and still want to live. That, and I think Riker in that episode, even Worf asks Riker to kill him, and Roger is just like, you know, just doesn't believe it, doesn't think that's the right decision, and he tries to convince him not to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And even Captain Picard, for me, his view in this episode was that, oh, you just don't understand Worf. You don't understand why he should, for him, being disabled is worse than death. And Riker says, that's not right. So that's what I thought.
I think that there is a need for a nuanced discussion of this kind of thing. I think I can see Aaron's point. My comparison would be the experiences of people disabled later in life, whether as a result of IEDs or auto accidents or whatever. And I think that Worf's perspective needs to be acknowledged as valid, in as much as it makes sense that from a psychological perspective, I've just been through hell and I don't really know what I'm going to do.
Yeah, and it's also a function of, not a function, but it's also cultural aspects and masculinity too.
Yeah,
I mean, you don't see many, disabled Klingons who are, like.
Well, that's Picard's point.
Who are swinging their bat lift around, and songs are not sung about disabled Klingons. I mean, death is much preferred and much, culturally far more important than living with a disability. So I think there's a lot to say about how cultural meanings and values really play into a person's point of view. And I think, again, what does it mean to be a man, especially in a society where physical ability is so prized and so much interlinked with being a man or a male Klingon. And so I think there's a lot of different layers that could be looked into.
Well, that's Picard's point to Riker. I think he says something like, he even said, and it's a very affirmative statement against that kind of suicide. He says, "You and I, Riker, you and I would learn to live with a disability like this. But for Worf, it's too much for Worf," and he means because he's a Klingon, which is kind of an interesting, hard to know what to make of that. I mean, I sort of accept that as, and he makes it a case of that. What is it, the cultural relativism, where you can't really criticize somebody for the culture that they have, and that's Picard's point of view. He is who he is. He's a Klingon, so it's not for us to tell him that it's wrong.
Yeah, and I just want to say what Day just texted in our group chat about one of the writers of an episode of Deep Space Nine in regards to Worf, the character. And she said, quote, this is from the writer of a Star Trek episode in Deep Space Nine, but about Worf. She said, quote, even though Worf is an alien and it's just a TV show, everyone knows we're making statements with Star Trek. Messages and values are being broadcast loud and clear. I resented the message in ethics that episode that Worf is worthless now that he's disabled and therefore must kill himself. I'm sorry that the portrayal had to exist at all. And this is from a writer of an episode who's actually a wheelchair user herself. Right. So that's another interesting point of view, that there are writers who are pretty cognizant of the statements or these messages by these episodes. And not to switch subjects, but Do you remember that episode where Sarek has a progressive disease and he's losing control of his logic? And I thought that was another, interesting, slice of disability in terms of progressive conditions later on in life. That he was really just trying to pass so hard, and really just in fear of his changing body and his changing mind. And I think that was another, way of depicting disability as this kind of the progressive nature of certain disabilities and illnesses.
For sure.
That's a good episode too.
Someone from the hashtag calls out an episode from Next Generation called Ethics.
That's the one with Worf.
That's the one about Worf that we just talked about.
Yeah. And by the way, I think I'm not as against the ethics message maybe as the writer, but I think where that whole thing broke down in the end was that the only way that they could figure out to get through the story was to have the reckless doctor, the reckless visiting doctor, come up with a miracle cure. So I didn't mind as much the discussion that went on, and I didn't mind Worf having the position he had because he is a Klingon, and it seemed consistent with that culture, and everybody else was against it. But then the only way they figured out to get out of it, there's no way he could continue to be disabled on that show. Like
Right.
that was just a non-starter. So of course the only way out is for a miracle cure.
That
That bummed me out just because it's so.
That's a Deus Ex Machina.
Yeah.
And I think another thing that they tested that. So because of the episode Ethics, the one with about Worf and suicide, we get a pretty decent Deep Space Nine disability episode called Melora, and I'd love for us to talk about that when we talk about Deep Space Nine.
Yeah,
Yeah,
definitely.
possibly.
I want to talk about it.
Yeah, we can, I just wanted to mention briefly the episode The Loss with,
Troy.
oh my god, Troy.
Troy.
And she loses her empath abilities for the episode. So what did you think about that episode, Alice or Andrew?
I do remember she has a real sense of loss, and she's going through a lot of mourning, and everything feels different for her without her empathic ability. So she is one of those like newly disabled kind of people. And again, like the other episode, you get a Deus Ex Machina where she gets her abilities back. It was just a temporary, injury / incident, and she has a taste of what life is like without her empathic abilities, and it's definitely a struggle. I mean, never see, if it lasted for, like, let's say, a year, how would she adapt, right? Would she adapt? Would she thrive and develop new skills, right? We'll never know that, but it just did show kind of the traumatic aspect, which is, I think, very real for a lot of people who become injured and disabled, through a lot of horrible circumstances.
And wasn't there a big thing of she basically saying, well, I can't be a counselor anymore, and the others saying, it was kind of cool that you could kind of semi-read people's emotions, but that's not a requirement to be a counselor. There are other counselors in Starfleet who are not Betazoids, so, get real.
Yeah, and I think that she tried to, like, continue working, and, she struggled, but she ended up still be able to help people while without her empathic abilities. So I think there were some examples of where she did figure out that are ways to still do your job and, without your abilities.
Yeah. Leaving aside the fact that counselors in our current 21st century are not empathic, hopefully.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a good thing, right? I don't want my counselor.
Yeah, I'm not sure. I got to think about that.
They don't want to know what I'm thinking.
Yeah.
Trust me. Not only do I not want to know, they would be scared.
Alright, on that note, we should talk about Deep Space Nine. And we can start with the episode Melora. So anyone can jump in and say, Alice.
Okay. Yeah, I guess
me?
There you go ahead.
So interesting because they didn't really tackle disability directly, and yet at the same they used the excuse of a low gravity alien. But what's kind of interesting was that the idea was that this character would use a wheelchair. What's neat is that Dax, the Trill, but it was too expensive to do that, and so they put it off and did not include that, which is an episode.
Expensive in Star Trek?
What was expensive?
In the budget sense, right?
What does that mean?
Right.
What's that even mean?
Low as a permanent part of the crew. In the episode, they have or up on wires because her her quarters are low gravity.
Right.
And the other thing is so she could operate, and it looked like an old piece of junk, and actually it would be an old piece of junk compared to what we have even, and line to show, which I thought was just what a way to kind of make a twist from it, but it came from the character herself. She sent the plans to him. She billed her as being very, very independent, and just as a callback to Captain Pike and that horrible like blobby box with the beep beep one button.
Yeah.
They actually originally wanted to use or borrow the wheelchair that was used in the Next Generation, but it was a nightmare and the set wasn't accessible, so they basically got the most stripped down wheelchair they could buy out of a medical supply store. Yeah,
those are the worst.
Kind of where it came from, but it's a fun episode. She comes in and they have this character who's very prickly and I'm all independent and I don't have to do anything sort of a way, and then because the idea was to create a disabled character who's accepted for who they are, they molded the episode, and the best way to do have the doctor find and finger quotes here, cure for the disability, which is a similar theme, and then have the character that's what was wanted, and like I said, this episode was written by Summers.
Have the
Wheelchair
character
user.
reject? You kind of cut off, so I didn't catch the.
Was remember where I was?
Did she go for the cure or not?
Yeah.
Right, and because it would make it a choice, and have the character was a wheelchair user who wrote it, intent in mind, and pushback because who would believe this? Nobody would want that. And so the 3 times after him to try and make it work. And to me, the idea is you have to work really hard to make it believable for somebody to choose to remain disabled. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah, I do remember that was a really interesting. The first time you really think about disability as a culture, you know, our planet, because of the low gravity, if she did get the cure, it meant that she could work and live and pursue her career outside of her home planet. She meant, again, this is almost, you know, we can overlay, you know, these things about assimilation, right, and integration, but, you know, she really wanted to go out. She's one of the few people in her planet that went out of her planet because of the gravity issues. And she's one of the few that made it as an ensign. But the choice was, if she had a cure, her body couldn't really revert back to a low gravity. So if she wanted to be cured, and she could be cured, she could have a life opportunities, a career that she could never imagine. But that meant, and they explicitly said that, she couldn't go back to her home planet for extended amounts of time. She couldn't even, you know, have her own private time in her low gravity unit because her muscles wouldn't really, you know, switching back and forth would be too hard. So she made the tough choice about leaving your culture, leaving your people and your way of life for, you know, so she decided to choose her people and her way of life.
So
and that was really in your choice. Yeah.
Is that the choice she made on the show?
Yeah. She told Bashir, you know, she had like multiple treatments and it was like difficult and he kept saying, you know, you have to adjust to it. And the more she realized, you know, I could do it, but it's at a cost of my identity, you know, in a lot of ways. I mean, she never said identity, but it's really about her identity as a whatever species she is.
Right.
But she would lose that part of her, and I think she decided.
I've got to watch it again.
Great way of saying fit in to make. Alice nailed it. It's you don't have to change. Not, you know, not for somebody else. A man, not to do it because it's what you want, and so it becomes her decision. And what's nice, where you see the person with the disability isn't being acted, she is the one who is making.
Yeah, she does have she definitely has agency, and I did like how, you know, they even mentioned how Deep Space Nine as a station, you know, they had to build ramps in anticipation of our arrival, and you know, Miles O'Brien was like, "Oh man, this station, you know, it's not gonna be perfect," and you know, they definitely, you know, struggled with that in terms of how to accommodate her because I guess they haven't had someone who needed a wheelchair in centuries, maybe, and I think that was really interesting how not only probably in the, as they mentioned, in the actual set of the show is inaccessible, but the actual space station was ill-equipped for a new crew member who needed it, and I think that's another aspect of accommodations that, you know, you don't often see that depicted in a show, so that was nice. But I think definitely what made it most progressive, we see from the original Next Generation, and then now with Deep Space Nine, it did seem far more explicit about disability, culture, and identity as something that someone claims, and that it's something that they want for themselves, and that it's not a lesser choice.
Mhm.
That's a great
I
segue.
actually,
Sorry.
go ahead.
We had a question from the hash from the hashtag. How accessible are the vessels? They want to know. They don't recall stairs on the Enterprise E, but they say that Janeway had stairs in her ready room.
Ah, damn it.
What? In a room? Oh yeah, I can see it. That's sunken, like sunken living room type of deal.
So 70s, right?
Yeah.
I have no comment. The Voyager was the 90s. Wait.
I know, but I mean, like, any sunken
Oh
room.
yeah, sunken rooms. I don't know.
You know,
Yeah,
it occurs to me that the Next Generation Enterprise had a lot of ramps. Like on the bridge, there were levels, but they were ramped.
hmm
So on either side. So.
Yeah, who knows how accessible, you
I
know?
feel like this is one area that I miss, maybe since I haven't actually seen a lot of the episodes. But then again, I don't know. I mean, reading the scripts is an interesting experience because I feel like I get simultaneously more information and less
Mhm.
because sometimes they're very, very detailed and sometimes it's it's an odd experience. I
Yeah,
have access to. Sorry.
they describe kind of the layout and things like that that people who don't read the scripts would miss it on. Like, what kind of information are we missing out on by not reading the scripts?
Well, I think a lot of it is. I mean, a lot of the main sets and things are just kind of assumed. If you say turbo lift or whatever, or bridge, kind of assumed that folks filming will know what the set looks like. So there's not a lot of set description,
hmm
except maybe on like unfamiliar landscapes or what have you, planets,
Well, I do love the
other
idea.
places. The main area of I don't know. I mean, I just think that the area of accessing the show as itself it should be a topic of discussion, if only because sometimes I feel like it's a little difficult for me as a blind fan to get
hmm
a true sense of
Are there video descriptions of Star Trek? I mean, audio description.
but it's not always easy to audio, video, descript, whatever. It's not always easy to get. I
Mm.
mean, I think that the UK, for whatever reason, seems to have more of them available, and I mean, there are places where you can watch episodes of it with description, but I don't know where they get the content.
Yeah, I mean, maybe it's created like crowdsourced, but I mean, that reminds me of a recent Twitter chat about Netflix and Daredevil and how, they really, when it first came out, they didn't even provide audio description about, the show, which was so ironic, but, they did it later on after being a
And
lot of,
I have to I my experience, I did have audio described versions of the original feature films,
Oh.
but not much after that until ironically the new Star Trek film series has had audio description, which is a nice touch. But it's still not quite the same, I guess, as the experience of folks who can see
yeah,
and have seen all of the
especially,
shows.
yeah, I think this is the special effects and, the detail about costume and makeup. I don't know how much of that goes into audio description, but that does add a lot to the characters and the plot. But I do say that I think so. Dave mentioned that on the Next Generation, she doesn't remember ever seeing anyone take the stairs. So maybe that's one plus. But I do think as a actual developer, as a wheelchair user who was a human in 2015, I would say that I would love the transporter and this idea. But oh my God, like that would just solve so many problems for me right now. So to me, that's always been one of the fun aspects of sci-fi and this series is the ideas of these different, you look at their tablets, you look at the way in the sick bay, how medication and treatments and surgery just seem to go without a hitch. So,
Yeah.
I mean, that's how I, under the table person, I'm like, I'm looking forward to that one day.
I wanted to start wrapping things up, but first we have a few questions, and from John or JD Little on Twitter says, what can we say about data as a neurotypical representation, or 7 of 9 on Voyager, or even Spock on the original series, or a neurotypical representation of disability?
Excellent question.
I think Data is someone who's neurodiverse and obviously superior to humans in terms of his abilities. And I find it interesting how he tries to emulate human behavior, human etiquette, all these kind of little social aspects and social cues. So that to me really says a lot about, neurodiversity and people on the spectrum who are really observant and really cognizant that they seem odd, right? That they don't get the humor or irony, and he's constantly trying to figure out these little subtle differences. So to me, definitely Data makes, it's very clear that Data and 7 of 9, are both kind of perplexed by human communication and human culture, and you can definitely see that as a metaphor for neurotypical people as human behavior, human verbal, social behavior as neurotypical, and people with enhanced or different neural nets like 7 of 9 and Data as neurodiverse.
Yeah, with the thing about Data is, I mean, I love Data. He's one of my very favorite characters in Trek. But in thinking about Data and Spock, for instance, they both, you could say, have some relation to autistic people. But Spock, interestingly, he's aware too of his difference, and he's not always comfortable with it. But he does have a bit of a more of a pride in who he is, and is not trying to be more human. Data is like a puppy dog. He wants to be like everyone else so badly, whatever that means, since he has no emotions. But he wants, quote unquote, to be, and I think maybe there's something there. I'm sure it wasn't conscious, but that's okay. It's a different. Do you want to fit in? Is that your big priority, or is it a lesser priority? And I think Spock, it was clearly a lesser priority. Data, it seemed to be pretty high, and that's just interesting. And both are characters that people absolutely adore. So it's not like Spock was viewed by the public as abrasive or anything. We love him, but they had two different approaches. Yeah. And I don't know much about 7 and 9, so I can't comment.
I think, for me, Spock more represented a different race rather than disability, whereas with Data, I felt he was more geared towards disability. And even though my favorite character that is a representation of disability is Odo from Deep Space Nine.
Oh no.
I love him. I think, for me, he was the best representation of disability without the show explicitly saying he is disabled.
Ooh, I'm
Just
sorry.
the way
Oh no. The
Oh,
changeling. The changeling.
Shadow.
I totally agree, Aaron.
yeah. So I think, for me, the way he was treated on the show, the way he feels like an outsider, to me, I really connected to that. What do you
Yeah,
think?
I do remember, I think, such fear that people had of changelings and how he was
Yeah.
experimented on, before he was, in his earlier form when he was on the station. And, that says a lot about, different ways of being. And that's so threatening to a lot of people. And they're using the difference between solid people and, changelings. It's really disruptive, the thought that a creature can be in any form, especially people like us, solid humanoids. So I thought that was a really great kind of example of difference. Really about difference, but really looking at it from a disability perspective. And I
And
think go ahead.
uh, did you can you read what Day posted? If you
Yeah,
can.
Dave's comment is one of the key points about science fiction is that it tends to go into two directions, either toward dystopian, like Hunger Games and Divergence, or strive towards the other end, which Roddenberry said was that he was looking for a better future. And in dystopian, we know that what happens to people with disabilities, yeah, they don't usually survive or are monsters. So when thinking of Star Trek as a positive future, what does it say about people with disabilities? And in answer to the previous question, I would argue that no, Data is not neurodiverse. He is a robot. And in relation, and I'm like, okay. So I think we'll have to agree or disagree. And on 7 of 9, Day says, I think a good argument can be made that now after the Borg interventions, she can no longer think like other people. Of course, then one could argue that she has brain damage instead. And at the end of the day, isn't it about the technology or the world and environment? It's about the people and how we're connected. And yes, that includes us, people with disabilities too. So that was from Day.
Well, that was a great comment. I was gonna say, I think it's a bit tricky to compare Data to somebody with autism or somebody who's neurodivergent, because, like she said, Data is a robot. He has no emotions, but somebody with a disability has emotions. So I think it's important to differentiate
Doesn't
that.
there? But doesn't he have that emotion chip? I mean, there's a
I
lot.
mean,
There's a lot.
eventually, yeah.
There's a lot that's not known about Data. He is a unique creation, so it's not like he's a room.
And well, and I agree with Dave.
He's a little more than a Roomba.
I mean, I do agree in a sense that it can be tricky to take the robot guy and say, oh, they're like autistic people.
Yeah.
But I think Data as a character is more than a robot, and a lot of what they explore with Data is what does it even mean to be a person, and what does it even mean to be, well, you're a person, but you're not a person, and that alone to me connects
Yeah, and
to disability themes.
yeah, and I want to make sure I'm not comparing, I'm not saying people who are on the spectrum are like Data. I'm just saying it's an example of neurodiversity. So it's just different ways of thinking, different ways of how people are wired. Not to say, I don't want autistic people to get upset at me. I'm not saying that at all.
No, I'm not saying any of us really are, but I mean,
yeah, I just want to make sure.
It's a possibility that floats out there when we start talking about it.
Yeah.
There are probably a lot of viewers who would make that kind of glib connection just because, oh, that seems like that, blah, blah, blah,
Yeah.
I think there are similarities of issues, but yeah. Anyway.
We have one question from the audience, if you will, about why.
Yeah, go ahead.
About why we like Star Trek so much. It's frankly, I mean, it's optimistic and it's fun, and there is a certain amount of genuine escapism in it, and I think I like it a lot for that, and for the hope, especially that in contrast to what Dave says about dystopian science fiction. And yeah, I mean, it tries very hard to be progressive and inclusive and so forth. It doesn't, as we've seen, doesn't always, but I think it does a pretty darn good job, all things considered, and that's why I like it.
Yes. And Alice, why do you like Trek so much?
I do think that, it's not to say it's a rosy, happy, idealized world, but it does strive for something better. And I think that sounds hokey, but that's something, I think I really enjoy this idea of expanding our notions of diversity and difference. And I think, being open to different cultures, I think that's, again, you can really push and think about all types of people in that sense. So, and again, I like the idea of how are people going to live differently? And again, the gadgets, the tech. I mean, I think there have been a lot of instances where things that were featured on the show are possible now. I mean, so I think that's what's exciting too, just different imaginings of how we're going to live and the different kinds of things that we'll use to make our lives better.
Right. Yeah, I think I love Trek for much of the same reason. I think it strives to better society. There's a message. The show has a message, but it also has a purpose, and that is to create a society, a vision of the future that recognizes diversity and accepts diversity. So that's why I love Trek so much.
Can I read what Dave wrote?
Yes, sure.
Yeah, sorry about that. I just want to make sure I include her comments before we wrap up. So Dave said, I love Trek because it in many ways epitomizes what is best in science fiction. Science fiction has been and still is a way to explore issues we cannot talk about today. we reframe them into a time far into the future. Science fiction addresses things like race and personhood, like Andrew mentioned. We're fighting for our lives to be seen as people with disabilities today, but it can gain no traction when it comes to arguing with ethicists. But an episode with data and personhood and the value of unique individualness, and suddenly what we say makes sense. Science fiction has championed civil rights, women's rights, and has talked about unique families and tolerance and societal responsibility. Star Trek gives us the best. I hope as it continues in the future there will be a place or a more visible place for people with disabilities. Well, that was a great comment by Dave.
Beautiful.
Definitely, yeah. That's great.
I would echo what everybody has said in the larger sense, but I do want to make a pitch, because what originally got me in was the original series, is certain relationships in Star Trek that are just so compelling, and best is the three key characters in the original series, Kirk, Spock, and McCoy, and there's really nothing like that relationship. And I mean, the other series really don't relate to it in that sense, but they set up their own relationships. But that one is so amazing that, you know, it's what hooked me into the whole franchise.
Well, yeah, and I think that's why the original series, for me, captured the best the characters on the show. I thought that was its main strong point of the original series, is that the characters were lovable. Everyone loves Spock, and I don't think any character in any of the series comes close to a character like Spock, you know? To me, he was the best of Trek. So, before we end, I want to make sure that everyone knows where we can find all of you. So, Alice, if you want, can you start and say where people can find you online?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm on Twitter at SF Direwolf. That's DIREWOLF, and that again is a hat tip or a nod toward my love of another show, Game of Thrones, and I usually live tweet that every Sunday night. And also, if you want to find me on the website.
But which house are we talking about? Sorry, I had to ask.
Yeah, we should connect. I'm also at the disabilityproject.com.
Nice. Okay, and Andrew, where can people find you online?
Okay, I'm at Andrew Pulrang, at Andrew Pulrang, that's PULRANG, on Twitter, and my website is Disability Thinking. And instead of reading you the address, just type Disability Thinking into Google and you will find it. And it's a blog where I just write pretty much daily about whatever I'm thinking of related to disability issues and stuff. And I also have a podcast called Disability.tv where I talk about disability on television. And you can get to that through my blog.
Okay, awesome. And Zach, where can people find you on Twitter?
I am at Z as in Zulu, Klein, KLINE, and I pretty much tweet about whatever I'm interested in at the moment. It could be games, it could be disability, it could be tech, it could be a mix of all three. So yeah, follow me if you feel like it.
Awesome. And you can find Day at DAY Day Al Mohammed, and I'm having a hard time seeing. Alice, can you spell it out for me?
Yeah, so it's DAYALMOHAMED.com. And you can also tweet Day at DAYALMOHAMED, Day Al Mohammed.
Thank you.
Cool.
So, thank you everyone for being on the show. This is my first. This is my first live panel. So, I think next time I'll know a little bit better how to run things. But it was a lot of fun. So thank you everyone for coming on.
Thank you.
And thank you. And
Thank you for having me.
A lot of fun.
yes, it
Right.
was. Awesome.
Even with all the
Yes.
Live long and prosper.
Yes.
Yeah.
So
No thanks. No thanks
Thanks
to
a
you.
lot. Bye, everybody.
Bye, guys.
bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye. And everyone can find me at Gimp on Twitter or geekygimp.com. So thank you everyone. Take care.
bye.
And bye. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Geeky Gimp Presents. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. If you have any questions or comments, you can email me or find me on Twitter at Geeky Gimp. Thank you. Bye.